across more than 2,700 cities in America, from the crowded avenues of New York to the quiet corners of rural Midwestern towns. One message is echoing with unmistakable force: no kings. These protests are not isolated incidents, not sporadic moments of frustration, not small pockets of political expression. Instead, they have grown into a coordinated, historic uprising, the largest mass demonstration movement the United States has witnessed since the turbulent year of 2020. And with millions marching, chanting, and standing their ground, these demonstrations are shaking the foundations of Donald Trump's second term like never before. Tonight, we dive deep into the origins, the triggers, the escalation, the faces, and the future of a movement that is not only redefining American politics, but is also testing the limits of power, democracy, and public patience. This is the story of the No Kings protests, a story woven from fear and hope, anger and resolve, uncertainty and unity. A story unfolding in real time, reshaping the world's oldest modern democracy. It did not begin with a single speech, a single policy, or a single executive order. Movements this large, this emotional, and this unpredictable rarely do. Instead, the roots of the No Kings protests stretch back months into Trump's second term, during a time when political tension was already tightening like a rope pulling from both ends. The rhetoric coming from the White House had been escalating, shifting from conventional political messaging into something sharper, more confrontational, more accusatory. Statements describing opponents as traitors, suggestions that critical institutions were corrupt, and public threats directed toward lawmakers began circulating widely, amplified by millions of supporters online. Each message, each post, each televised appearance slowly added fuel to a fire waiting for oxygen. The moment that changed everything, the moment historians will likely point to as the spark, came when Trump suggested that certain political rivals engaged in what he described as seditious behavior, language that, in another era, might have been dismissed as hyperbole, but in this era felt dangerously literal. For millions listening, this wasn't merely political theater. It was personal. It was alarming. It felt like a direct threat to democratic norms. And with that, something shifted. Something quiet at first, then powerful, then unstoppable. The protests began. The earliest demonstrations were small, scattered, and peaceful groups of students, community organizers, and local leaders gathering in city parks and courthouse plazas, holding handmade signs and chanting simple, memorable phrases: "No kings, we are not subjects, democracy, not dominion." But something different happened this time. The energy spread almost instantly. Within hours, those small gatherings turned into larger ones, and within days, the movement crossed city limits, state borders, and political lines. It was no longer a local issue. It was national and unmistakable. Images went viral. Streets filled. News helicopters flew overhead. Police set up barricades. Local governments issued statements. And the chants, once scattered and quiet, now rose like a wave across the country. No kings, no kings, no kings. America has seen protests before, massive ones, emotional ones, even violent ones, from the civil rights marches, to anti-war demonstrations, to the protests of 2020. But the No Kings movement feels different, not only because of its scale, but because of the message at its core. This isn't just about one policy or one decision. This is about power, about fear, about democracy itself. Analysts describe the movement as a collective emotional eruption triggered by the sense that long-standing political norms, guardrails that once protected the country, are now eroding. Trump's critics view his second-term rhetoric as authoritarian, while his supporters believe the protests represent coordinated political resistance designed to undermine his presidency. But regardless of interpretation, the result is the same: a nation increasingly on edge, staring at its own reflection in the mirror, unsure if the reflection looks familiar anymore. As the protests grew, so did the government's response. In some cities, police presence increased dramatically, and in others, National Guard units appeared on the streets. Reports of federal agents in unmarked uniforms circulated widely online, prompting new fears, new rumors, and new counter-protests. Major cities like Portland, Chicago, Los Angeles, and Memphis saw the largest demonstrations, with streets blocked for entire nights, buildings surrounded by activists, and waves of citizens refusing to disperse despite curfews, warnings, and arrests. As pressure built, the protests evolved. Organizers created communication hubs, volunteer medics set up triage tents, lawyers offered free legal services, and digital networks coordinated marches in real time. What began organically was now structured, strategic, and resilient. And the chants continued, louder, stronger, more unified. Throughout the escalation, Trump's public statements became a central focus. Each press conference, each Truth Social post, each rally, and each televised comment was scrutinized, dissected, interpreted, and reacted to in real time. Supporters argued that Trump was defending the nation from extremist plots and political sabotage. Critics claimed he was fueling the tension, encouraging conflict, and escalating hostility. One post in particular, suggesting harsh consequences for perceived seditious actions, became the rallying cry of the protests. Activists printed it on posters, painted it on banners, and plastered it across social media feeds. Trump's words had impact not only on the political environment, but on the emotional environment. And once the emotional climate shifts, once people feel threatened or unheard or pushed too far, protests become movements, and movements become moments, and moments become history. Contrary to initial assumptions, the No Kings protests do not come from a single demographic, ideology, or generation. The crowds are diverse racially, economically, politically, and socially. In interviews from multiple cities, reporters spoke to young voters marching for the first time, retirees who hadn't attended a protest in decades, suburban families marching with children, veterans carrying American flags, former Trump supporters who felt disillusioned, longtime activists warning against authoritarianism. This diversity is rare. It's powerful. And it's part of what makes the movement unpredictable. For many protesters, this is not simply about politics. It's about the feeling that something fundamental is shifting in the United States, a sense that democracy, long taken for granted, is now vulnerable. While the protests are centered in the United States, global reactions have been swift. International journalists describe the situation as a critical moment for American democracy, while foreign governments issue statements urging calm. Allies quietly express concern. Rivals use the moment for political leverage. Images of American cities filled with protesters, holding signs, waving flags, chanting in unison dominate international news broadcasts. Analysts abroad describe the unrest as a sign of democratic instability, a warning that political polarization has reached critical mass. The United States, once seen as a model of stability, is now a stage for unrest, and the world is watching closely. As crowds grow, so do fears. Not all protests have remained peaceful. Some nights ended with fires burning along city streets, clashes between police and activists, broken windows, and mass arrests. While the majority of protesters are peaceful, it takes only a handful of violent incidents to create national panic. City officials warn of potential escalation. Community leaders call for calm. Social media amplifies fear as quickly as facts. And through it all, the central question remains, how long can this continue before something irreversible happens? Trump's administration has responded in waves, statements condemning anarchists, calls for law enforcement to restore order, and arguments that the protests represent an attack on national stability. Insiders describe internal debates within the White House. Some advisors reportedly push for stronger law and order actions, while others warn that aggressive tactics could ignite further unrest. The president, meanwhile, remains defiant. His messaging frames the protests as political resistance orchestrated by enemies of the state, while supporters insist he is protecting the nation. But something is clear. The protests are affecting the presidency publicly, politically, and emotionally. Movements this large rarely fade quickly. They evolve, they fracture, they grow, they intensify. And the No Kings movement seems destined for longevity, fueled by passion, fear, frustration, and hope. Organizers are already planning long-term strategies, nationwide marches, voter mobilization drives, legal challenges, and international outreach. Analysts suggest the protests may influence voter sentiment, congressional behavior, and even foreign perception of American stability. Whether the movement strengthens or fractures will depend on political decisions in the coming weeks and on the public's emotional endurance. Tonight, America stands at a crossroads. One path leads toward de-escalation, dialogue, and democratic resilience. The other leads toward deepening unrest, institutional strain, and national uncertainty. The No Kings movement is more than a protest. It is a mirror reflecting the fears, the frustrations, and the aspirations of millions of Americans who feel unheard and unsettled. And as they march through the night, holding signs, raising voices, refusing to step aside. One truth becomes clear: democracy is not a guarantee. It is a fight carried not by politicians, but by ordinary people in extraordinary moments. A fight not for power, but for the promise of a nation built on freedom, equality, and shared responsibility. The chants continue, the crowds continue, the movement continues, and the world watches as America decides what kind of country it wants to be.